Hello everybody, welcome back from spring break. It is now time for me to announce what is here, and that is Masterclass. This is a Coursera Masterclass on YouTube. YouTube invented the Masterclass for these series. We're going to have a look at some things I brought down for this class in a moment, but I need to take care of a few things. First of all, that we're still treating through Harvard, because they're big time all for us, and we need to make film classes. And if you're in the wrong class, this is a film class. And we're discussing this term, film technologies, mainly film special effects, cinematic special effects. The School of Cinematic Special Effects is what you've entered. And we're not going to have any special effects on this show, although I will convince to you that the camera itself is involved and engaged in several special effects right now as we're speaking, to make the image look a certain way, to make the color correction look a certain way. It's going to bounce back as a different kind of an image once it records into itself, and then when it nests, it'll kind of be this certain type of recording, and where it's presented will again be a special effect of how it was recorded, because what's recorded one way, every time you change the dimensionality to any of the mathematical coordinates throughout the picture, it already changes the way the picture is and is a special effect. That there's probably a general mode you set everything on that isn't special effects mode, and to think of all the lighting techniques they had to get from the camera to work digitally is already amazing. That there's a general mode that would have taken almost longer to get to, or as long as the special effect mode of black and white. Now, if I were to turn this black and white, that wouldn't be as good as... See, I do have some specialties to my camera, because one time my camera heard that I was playing Pokemon and took a picture of a Pokemon card for me when I beat the game. And so that's... And I'm Dr. Aaron Sheley, by the way, and that's what I go by as the Pokemon Master. No, I don't really, but there's not many special effects in that episode of Dungeon Master, which is a show I run. I also direct movies. My recent movie is Lazy Smoker. I'm not supposed to talk about myself too much, especially in summer school. I did already teach a master class on film criticism. Actually, it went for 2 semesters. It was an entire year last year. We had a lot of fun. We built up, this is where we'd be going, to what we'd be doing with our class. And it still works at USC. USC has loved the idea of a class you can take at Coursera for film that everyone can take, and you go at your own pace, and you see the ending, and then you take the final, or what the school requires of you to get the credit for it, which is already on the class to teach the material in the professor courses. And then get this, mine's even more difficult because you actually have to watch all of it. Like, you have to watch all the episodes. The computer keeps track of how much you've seen. So unless you're one of those few people that can work with me independently and test out. And I have actually had a really good case of an independent worker come to me, and we wrote a book together. And I think that's fun, because then when nothing goes wrong, you're still blaming each other for what could have gone wrong. And that's actually something I'd like to apologize about, because when it's working with me, there's a lot of things that could have gone wrong. I mean, first of all, I could have got my paperwork into Harvard, into USC, and into Calarts all at the same time, which I kind of did in 2020. But then that wasn't the secret to opening a masterclass, but that I brought my masterclass back to the school was a really hearty consumption of them being, this is the whole reason why we decided to give you a degree. Sure, we'll work with you. It's like, that's what you're constantly doing in the PhD world, is like, you're still enhancing your portfolio. And my mentor, John Wagner, he's a good example. He's at California Institute of the Arts, and he's been the dean for so long of that school that he actually, I have him to thank for so much, because in the last 20 years, I've always felt the urge to get more accomplished than I would have otherwise for knowing him. And that, just knowing someone that can get more work accomplished, is already something you need in the writer world or the professor world. And how many classes he gives a semester at each school that he teaches at. I'm just saying, like, this is one master class per semester. We got a summer class, and then we got our spring class and our fall class. And fall class is coming up after the summer, of course. And I'm just going, well, that's easy for me to do, right? Because I got all the things read, and I've got it all researched for the most part, worked in a lot of the businesses, know how it works. But the masterclass getting it has to be highly skilled. But still, even though it is a lot of classes condensed into a class, I appreciate professors that teach 3 to 4 classes a semester a lot, because I don't think I could have a planning session long enough to jot down what I'd be teaching 3 classes of, that I let alone have 3 other jobs as a book writer and a musician and an editor, whatever else, and a director. That's great. That's great that I have those jobs, and those things are all essential for being at your top of your game when it comes to arriving at the PhD level. But trust me, every little bit counts that you work on harder after that, because it's not that you'll lose it, it's just that it'll mild calm, and people will wonder why you were after this thing that you so wanted, that there's greatness even beyond it that you can go and gather, and it's not the end, but at the time you're getting it, you're kind of hoping it will be in some respects, because you're like, if this doesn't end soon, it's gonna smack my head, and it won't be a special effect. It'll be real slapstick. The slapstick. Now we'll go right into the class. Source for USC Calarts. It's a 3-unit class. It's called Film Special Effects. Now, right away, I have to tell you, there's this filmmaker that I saw his grave at the Père Lachaise. His name is Georges Méliès. Write this down if you take notes. And Georges Méliès, actually, I have a film of his over here that's from 1899. And it's when he was already gathering together all of these, like, studio sets that are full of, like, trap doors and clouds and, like, fires and explosions, and the whole set's turning around. And so he was already doing what is known as special effect filmmaking, formalism. Now, special effect filmmaking arises from Méliès, but you got to think there were probably some contexts earlier in art history that had special effects to them. We already know from Masterclass that paintings are made to look differently depending on where you're standing by them, because they have a little light meter in them called a nodule, and from wherever you're looking at the painting changes the depth and the proximity of how the painter painted it to that nodule. That's slightly what you would call occultic. Okay, we'll try and remain in the real, but you got to understand, Harry Potter is slightly occultic. And they show you how to do some of the things on there that have actually helped some people I know that were real wizards, but that's a big secret society. See, it's a real secret society to know a wizard, and automatically you think of special effects, but then you see it for real like that, and that's why we all in the movies know that it's a special effect, is because for real it does happen like that. See, I don't think we can just say that wizards shoot electricity through their hands unless the human race has already admonished that, yes, wizards can shoot lightning through their hands, just nobody ever sees it. And by nobody ever sees it, it's either one of those nobody ever sees or no one remembers it, or they're in the wizard club and they're keeping a secret. And how many here have actually seen a wild lightning storm that they thought they could maybe manipulate and maneuver? Probably not many. But if that Harry Potter kid was outside manipulating lightning, we'd all probably think it was really him, even though we know that the movie put it through a special effect to make it look that way. You're drawing onto the medium of film. See, the medium of film, one thing that's nice about it being able to be slowed down is then you can draw on the medium. I think when you're looking at James Cameron doing special effects at Digital Domain, he's taking all these printer shots of each frame and printing the special effect that they created, printing it back onto each frame. So you go frame by frame printering. Well, that takes a lot of measurement with the computer as to how the lightning bolt should look in the frame as it prints onto each one, 24 frame per second frame. Single frame of that. So 1/24th of a second gets printed on by an expensive machine. Now, we're already talking expensive when we go into special effects, but one thing I have heard in kind of a twisted way that special effects have helped people with is so that way you don't have to work as hard on the film. Well, hang on. Because don't you have to build a set like Méliès did to hold and hoist all the special effects that are going on? Isn't this theatrical? Don't we have to have the haunted house before we can have the ghosts go through it, Otherwise, it's just ghosts roaming on the plane, and that's a movie I've been trying to make for years, but I don't think I'll ever get ghosts roaming on the plane made. No, seriously, though. You're already building the set in a compass to the special effects. And this brings up the point of this class, if nothing else. We had heard for many years in film school, and this is still right, that when a new special effect comes along, then a whole slew of movies uses that special effect. Now, what's never been filled in the blank on that is whether it was necessarily for the film or they just developed the process that could. And I guarantee both of those things have happened, but typically it's before the product was made, because that's one of the expenses of the movie, is to make the product for shooting the movie with. In fact, we've talked about this in Masterclass a little bit. When Star Wars was shot, Episode 1, they were trying as fast as they can to get this camera built that Lucas designed completely. And he designed it completely so he could shoot a digital film that looked exactly like a 35 millimeter print of 24 frames a second. Even if the frames a second are different, the look is the same. We're shooting on a medium now that's HD. I mean, it's so high above HD now, we're not even sure where these are shooting now. These grids we have that are so micro-focused. But I remember when 1999 was there, the digital revolution was coming on, everything was straightening out. And the first movie, 1999, it's a really great movie, but they had to use film in some of it. And it was so complicated, George Lucas said, because you'd have to know which film and digital went together and have to stage both sides to look like they went together and then mat them on. And it really cost him more time, and it was really drastic. Constantly thinking that you're melding film with the digital. It'd be like harder to do than melding even an animated cell that comes over the live action, like in Roger Rabbit, where you have animated characters over live action. But again, that wasn't something they discovered how to do right then on Roger Rabbit. There are things that we have got to consider, and one is this technological considerations, that it's a technological medium, yes, that the camera runs itself, yes, that to teach this masterclass, I didn't have to build the camera that's sitting here before you to teach it. I didn't do anything. That's all I did was remember that everything is mediated in media. That's why it's called media. Everything is. The time it's going, you know, the color of my shirt was chosen by me, but the way it looks to you through this camera and the next camera, the YouTube side that fades it out, or anything else in this masterclass, it's still mediated by a general lighting scheme, which it would be so crucial for me to know what a general lighting scheme is. And I would normally think, well, that's foreground light, background light, backlight, and then the whole set gets lit. And we don't have that here. We've got about 3, 4, 5 lights, but it's not a 5 lighting setup, because they're all basically used as general setup, like not really to flatten the shot, but just to kind of light the room. I mean, it's utilitarian. But the camera makes every picture look so clear. It's, you know, another special effect. So here they are. They get to episode 2 on Star Wars, and now they can shoot the whole thing in digital. And now you see they can rampage you with all of these images of this like total maelstrom of a Star Wars 2 movie now, because they can control it all digitally. I don't think it was to send people home from jobs that they did most of it digitally. The whole thing was digital. In fact, most movies up to like after around Batman by Tim Burton, even that was starting to get digital use. You know, around the time of Great Mouse Detective was the time the computer imaging came into movies, and that was 86, I think. And then, you know, everybody knows the big one, Apocalypse Now, used a computer to edit its film. They had to digitize everything, but you can only imagine how Lucas had to, for episode 1, he had to digitize everything and then refilmize it and then redigitize that and then do the same to film it, digitize it, film it. I mean, you're just going on these processes to match everything up. I can see why we went to a digital medium, by the way. I think there argues nothing more the case than the cameras that are used. And cameras, I'm only bringing this up in special effects because we haven't even gotten to what the real meaning of special effects are, but that technology is moving in such a way to create our effects is partially true. But that cinema didn't really come together as an invention until December 12th, 1895, because the Lumiere brothers, they didn't just film it, they showed it. And since they showed it in open-air cinemas, and everyone that no one had ever seen, and now they know it works, you know. The camera works, they still have the camera, the movie works, and they didn't, you know, consider it a movie until they showed it. So all those abstract images that are coming along in these pre-cinematic toys are not forgotten. But we talk about the things of movies, the things that would happen at the Lumières. Now, were they considering special effects? They wanted to show reality for it was and do the whole thing where you're showing reality for everything that it is. So that's what you do with an actuality by Lumière. You show reality for as it is. But wait, their third or fourth movie, this building is like sliced in half, and this building is like falling in this wreckage, and it's from like a, you know, some kind of construction where they're taking down buildings, and it's all done safely, but this building slides like halfway down, and then the film reverses, and it goes back up. It's like this collapsing building that goes back up and lands itself, and we're all sitting here thinking, oh man, that's a special effect that rewound it, and it's still exactly what would have happened if it would have gone backward, but nobody knew that exactly would look like that until now, and so now cinema is a science. Now cinema is a science, because not only did they manipulate some machine like like a nodule toy, like one of those things, pre-optic toys, the Chamber of Wonders, you know, the commerce spiels where you look in the little hole and you see the whole place is moving, and then you've got the magic lanterns. And talk about special effects, because there's a scene of special effects in Tim Burton's Sleepy Hollow where you get to see the use of the magic lantern in use. The Headless Horseman comes to, here's these kids that are hiding, he's coming back to take their heads, and this magic lantern is spinning around, and it's producing this effect on the wall of like what the original cinema really was, apart from these commerce bills and other pre-optic toys like we'll get to, like eventually the Zoetrope was built. And that cinema itself is based on a special effect, 24 frames, run by in a second, then it looks like they're really connected and moving. If they're the picture that was taken, a singular frame before them would have been taken at 24 frames a second. Now don't write that down yet, because I think I'm running into a problem. You can arrange the images at less than 24 per second, but who figured out the exact distance from one frame to the next? Did they just know that a second would fill, and then they divide it into 24 24ths? Because if you're dividing a second into 24ths, is that what you're doing with 29 frames? Kind of are. Kind of are, and we can leave it at that, or we can say, you're not really saying it's 1 in 24, but actually now that it goes slower in 29 and faster in 22, or 22 goes longer. No, 22 goes longer and 26 goes slower, right? Because the more you have the frames, the more it looks like it's standing still, or going faster. But to slow it down, you'd have less frames, because then it's taking more time to get through it. And we discovered it here. If everyone else is listening, I think it's a David Bordwellism to say it's not just 24 frames per second, it's 1/24th of a second. And that's how many frames of those you have to print with a printer. Now, if you print those with a printer, you're already animating, and then to find out where it would be in the next box would mean someone in the history of time, like the Lumières, had to have recorded what a second would be like, which is like a freeze frame for a second. And then you divide it into 24ths, what that freeze frame can show each box of. And then, if you're even trying to stay in the same venue as a second, which usually even a second is not too long for a take, but some takes are a lot longer than a second long. Like on audio mixes, you can have a second be crucial. Even on video mixes, I've seen 1 second throw the whole thing over, yeah. But down to the second, if they'd filmed it just like it would be on a freeze frame for a second, if that wanted movement, then they'd take 24 individual pictures that were all progressing towards the final picture in terms of movement, which when it's turning on a zoetrope totally looks like it's moving by itself. And now we get into the idea of cinema being an automated projection of a succession of images. An automated procession of a succession of images. So that's why we get the December 12th vote, because it's automated. Yes, we know that. It records it automatically. It shows it automatically. It's a procession. Yeah, it's all these different shots shown at once, and they're 24 per second. They're all going around. It's a session, which is already suspension of disbelief, persistence of vision. Persistence of vision is 24 frames a second, and it's and from one to the next, progressing to the way it would to the end of the next through movement, is in fact not suspension of disbelief, Brett. It's where you suspend your disbelief toward the amount of time it takes. And now I'm going to take an error there, but I'll tell you the suspension of disbelief is from the images themselves, because it's a projection, so we know it's coming from an automated machine, so we're kind of being doubly metaphorical about the automated. And persistence of vision is where 24 frames move per second to show you that it's moving. But once it's persistence of vision, then it's suspend your disbelief, because you have the images. And the images that are coming up are already in the early 1899, and film was invented in 1895, and already with the rewind of the fallen building, and now we're into people in America starting to mess around with the early types of film, and they're inventing things like the match-on-action cut, which is going to be the most important cut of all, and the editing seems like a type of special effect all of a sudden. And that actually all these like major terms we use for all the art of film were at one time kind of composed for effects, how it would affect the film special effect. Isn't that weird? Some have grown into these industries that are way beyond special effects. Like editing's not the same thing as special effects, that's not what I'm saying. But that it grew out of it, like every camera principle, is usually to change the way the shot looked from film to film in order to brand a film, even in a not-so-commercial genre. They wanted the artists to take over the film, so they kind of branded it their way with the type of pictures you're seeing. It's a special effect. It's a correction of color. It's things they do now with the internet just from knowing who you are and what you do and how you talk to people. And they had ways of writing all that down back in the days of Louis Fouillard. What would you want the film to end like? They'd have them fool it out, and then they'd go film the ending while they're watching the marathon that comes before. That's a good way to make a movie. I mean, but going back to Méliès, Méliès in the early 1800s, the late 1800s and around the turn of that century, he was making these films where he was like the devil, and he's doing these magic tricks, and he's really doing magic. Like, lo and behold, in the silent era, Houdini was even in an early film in America, showing himself and doing tricks. I mean, here we have Méliès. He wasn't really sure he wanted to become a magician, but that he invented film special effects and film as a formalism. And film as a formalism is where you build out of the components of film the way you want the artist to be abstractedly prevailing in its response among its viewers in the audience. And that's how you compose something with or without special effects to draw attention. Now, Méliès thought of these magician rules as special effects. Most special effects today are still building off of rules from Méliès's day. There's an example I'd like to give. In A Trip to the Moon, which is the one that they redid with Smashing Pumpkins Tonight, but hear me out, in A Trip to the Moon, there's this part where the lady's kind of afraid because this bouncing, devilishly looking alien moon person is coming at her and bouncing all at her. So she swings a parasol and it's like, poof! The alien just poofs into smoke and disappears. And I'm thinking, what does that remind me of but a lightsaber battle? Or, there's like, they're swinging these lightsabers around, and the lightsabers are coming down, and the lightsabers are going fast, and all the lightsabers look beautiful and everything. But as soon as the guy gets Obi-Wan Kenobi gets corked in episode 4, is it not the same thing as beating one of the moon people, just a more elaborate special effect? They use the same kind of timing intentionally in Star Wars to be like A Trip to the Moon in that scene that was all set up to do that. I didn't figure that out. Like George Lucas crammed as much Méliès as he could into the early Star Wars movies, and then went wild with the Méliès later in the Star Wars works. That the Méliès is like one of those Jules Verne's type orchestration, H.G. Wells type prophets of his day, that he knew that one day there would be like this outstanding spectacle, and the lights and imagery and everything that cinema is built on will project to us things that we can't take our eyes off. And they've done just that, and that's why I condone special effects. And no, a lot of the times, like they did with episode 2, they were building the camera while they were making the movie in part 1, and they knew what they needed to do with the camera in part 2. And I'm not saying one's better than the other, because George Lucas likes all the movies he directed, and I won't go anywhere near trying to put one above the other. But I'm just saying, like, if we had all the time in the world to talk about special effects, and that was the only topic, and all we were sitting here doing is saying, Star Wars is great, we'd be failing. But what we would be failing, Star Wars, if we didn't accept special effects as a necessary part of, in fact, sci-fi, fantasy, and horror genres, as the formalist context of the film possesses itself that way since 1899 with Méliès. And so that Méliès is kind of this form buster, and that he brings up all these forms is great because he's French, and the French are always form busters, you know. And now we've got the exact opposite of like the imprint camera code of Bazin, where Bazin is not really working on special effects. He's saying the imprint of the camera makes an imprint of the photo, of the imprint of reality of what's already there, even if it's in a general lighting scheme and generally built in the background. Like the camera is basically taking a picture that's not mediated with, in fact, except for the lighting, and that is the real reality of what we're seeing when it's going on at the time. And that is pretty true, because what I'm saying right now is being recorded. I'm not like recording over it. I'm not reading off a script. You'll never find these scripts until they come out with and they'll come out with those things on the bottom of these. I've already seen it where they close caption it. Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. Like the scripts of these doesn't exist. You know, that wouldn't have been in it. And so, yeah, you're taking an imprint of things that are going on in reality now. I wouldn't be holding myself quite this way in reality, because normally when I talk to people, they don't want to get punched in the face for sounding like, hey, I'm a smarty pants professor. Did you know the first great special effects were George Méliès or actually the Lumiere brothers? We can get in a conversation about it all day if you want. You know, I can't really do that with much crowd, and really the film crowd that I would contain myself with at this level so far to the a priori point where the whole world of cinema is a priori. You know, like last year at Marion Bad has codes that are both heterophobic and homophobic, but hetero-plausible and homo-plausible plot projects wake up in last year at Marion Bad. I mean, you have to know these are like reaches to the cabinet you have to be able to grab, you know. That's why we went through film criticism, is to kind of divide everything out into the universe of what these films are. But I came to special effects first, not because it's just my era, because I think it's underrated. I think it's underrated. I think it's weird how movies that have special effects, and even though Batman did use some non-digital effects that were really amazing by Tim Burton, I'm saying that special effects films can be just as good as, if not better, than, like, you know, your old-fashioned big budget, you know, westerns. And westerns are special effects film. They got guns going off, they got people in costumes, they got people falling off where, you know, but the computer effects really have to happen. You know, there's no way to do a movie that's fantasy comedy or fantasy, sci-fi, and horror without the digital side. And actually, that we've gone to the digital side and we still shoot differently for each genre is part of what I'm talking about. And part of how the genre already has its, like, necessary props. Because, see, props are kind of like special effects if they've been geared to be put over the top of it. Now, if only intrinsic special effects are like when they're done by clay, or when they're done by, like, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, the way they moved those dinosaurs around with Ray Harryhausen wasn't digitally. Although they had a few, you know, like timers, digital timers that were going off to see how far they had to move the claymation. But those are in-camera effects, if you can believe that. Now, the difference is when you go and add the special effects later. And either way, it's going to be hard because you're going to have to build it ahead of time anyway and close the same way otherwise. But the in-camera effect is where the camera itself doesn't have to have anything added by the computer, which the camera is a computer at this point anyway, right? But the camera, computer, I love you. Make me look beautiful on Masterclass. Go. No, I'm kidding, but it's like, you know, just the camera, the in-camera effects, that's where we get special effects from, is like the idea that you can put something in front of it. Like Méliès had to be in-camera because digital wasn't existing. And in-camera is the solution to digital. You can just record one thing, record the next. You know, you can even, if you, like, take one of those old cinematograph cameras, it's a 35 millimeter. You could set it up so that, like, half of it's covered on this side, and this side is open and recording, and then you run the film back through the rewinder, and then you put it back through at the same spot, same recording aspect ratio, and this time you cover the other side and film, and it'll film this side, and it'll match them together, whatever you filmed, like a perfect match. It'll, I mean, even if you're matching things that don't match, it'll look like they're squelched together, and this would only come in handy if you're doing like an art avant-garde student film. But sometimes you could see where there'd be a special effect that you'd need to change the guy into someone else. Like the morphing technique kind of comes from that, because it's one side becoming the other, and really it's in such a fast way that you can't tell that it's just a few cartridges, 1,000 cartridges of motion, you know, to cover that your face on that printer. And you know, and then you say, then there's the whole argument. Well, it's like, well, we actually invented the special effect for the film because the script called for it. Because see, a lot of times in special effects movies, like Ghostbusters will say, and then they got out their laser guns, and their lasers will shoot towards the wall where there's ghosts in the script. And so you're thinking, well, we're going to have to build that. Like, how we knew that already existed is not really easy when you got to build something that the script wrote it down with. But I'm not bagging on anyone's idea. Because then you get the creative people and they're like, yeah, we already got one of those. I'm like, that's everything, you know. Before Méliès's days in our secret Freemasonry vault, you know, we got one of those lightning capturers. We can get that shot. Yeah. And then you're just like, all right, well, now we're going to have to make it look fake. And this is kind of a joke by putting a special effect over it, because that's going to look like some supernatural shit if those Freemasons start shooting lightning around. So I'm just kind of kidding, but you got to, like, and the reason I'm using lightning coming out of the hands is it seems that's the most prescient one of all the special effects that we accept as a reality. We haven't seen someone actually shoot lightning bolts from their hands, maybe, unless we've kept it secret, but that it can be done in movies is totally realistic. We'll suspend our belief way beyond that point because of the imagery of the lightning coming out of his hands. And this says intra montage. See, it's still in the camera, but it's added later. And that's the difference between it in camera and it added later. Usually they're a combination of both. They do the effect on one side and they do the effect on the digital side and combine over the top. And that's what makes a great special effect three-dimensional. That's what makes it expensive, because you got to print out a laser copy of all the things that are changing in the frame onto the frame. He does. Now, you got to admit, now that we don't use film a lot, and that was an old interview with James Cameron I had about how he would print out those digital effects, but they still kind of do that, only now it's digital to digital, and that you can see where it is on the machine, and a split second after it happens, and you can actually calculate the hours that it'll be to change the motion, as you'll still have to do every couple of hours. You'll change the motion just enough that your measurements show would have been where that kind of a character that you're using would have moved within a 24th of a second. This is not an easy measure. That's how animation is born, because because Emile Cole, for instance, another Frenchman that invented the cinema, he developed this method to draw chalk onto a black piece of construction paper, and then if he moved it a little bit each frame, then it started to move like Phantasmagoria the movie, and then you see these moving images. Now you've got a special effect, because the rest of the cinema is going, wait, what is that different? There was no actors in that. It still looked like there were people in it. It was a cartoon. It was the world's first cartoon, and they didn't know what else to call it, because it was like faces and people and clowns and having fun, and it was like one of those old things in the newspaper, like a cartoon, you know, whatever. I don't know where they call them cartoons, mainly because they're animated. And a cartoon means, I know what it means. I'm not sure why they came up with that, but I know what it means. It means a moving, animated piece that is coherent, typically for commercial use as a viable narrative story, coming as it has from the newspaper comic strips, which were above the industry of the animation industry. Now, Méliès got the animation award for his, like, jump cuts, and his jump cuts are really Godardian. Now, we can show how Godard uses a jump cut in a modern way by saying, are you watching this film too closely? Wham, you're watching a different scene. Wham, you're back to that scene. Wham, you're watching a different scene. So he can take you out of the movie and put you back in and really distract you into thinking different things than you would on the second time through the film, which you'd start to see more that he's just doing that for the jump cut purpose of a jump cut. And then you see in Méliès that he's doing it to entertain. He's tricking the audience in one sense by putting the egg down here, and then that area blows up and he comes out the top. You know, he's just like he's got this trap door. Now, here's something to throw it in with Bazin and everything. Now, one thing I could never understand about Bazin and all these critics, they're really great, and I love the put the frame on it the way it's supposed to be, even though you've got to build the set just like you've got to build the special effects, you know. And doing a digital set for a digital background is perfect, because then you can key in the way, the exact way you like the film. Aren't we supposed to be making it exactly the way we want to? So then you get this whole thing, well, filming the real thing's better, but we already talked to Bazin on that. You can't film the real thing because it doesn't exist anymore. So if you're filming the real thing, then it's already gone, and you're like Rossellini, a day late, and a whole canister of film that no one's going to watch until 20 years later, and then they'll realize he was right. He should have shown it on TV, but all the houses had been blown up in World War II. Now, I'm going to go back to what I was saying about the set being shown digitally or not is not the point of what I'm making. The point of what I'm making is when you're abstracting the evidential reality between here and the camera, there's still a mode that the character's acting brings to it. There's still a mode of, like, reality to a normal unabstracted shots. You can really do a lot to move an abstract shot around. And I was talking to, actually, this is a true story, I was talking to my friend Harmony Corinne. We're only acquaintances, really. I don't know him personally. And he makes all these other films, and I just made a Dogma 95 film, and I was talking to him, and I said, you know, I'm going to do this class on special effects, and he was kind of drawn back. He's like, that sounds terrible. I don't want to hear about that. And I'm like, no, you will, because I'll use you on the first day of the class, because what I'm thinking about special effects is how you arrange and recreate the camera and how you move it in certain ways, even in reality's, you know, swish pans and everything. And I told him that every time his camera moves and is swishing to the right or the left, or upside down or backwards, through the wall or through the ceiling or anything, he's already using this as an effect to make the film more deranged as it goes, like they did in A Woman Under the Influence, and he does in, say, Gummo, where he'll really twist the movement of the film to really make it look like it's something it isn't. And that in and of itself is just as, it's a realist type of special effect. But check this out. You get a filmmaker like Fouillard, and he's got this whole blanket of, like, what the exact shot's going to be for the next 10 minutes. And he kind of draws it out. Or what the shot's going to be for the next 7 minutes, and kind of draws it out. But all throughout, are there not some of those random trapdoors and random ways to sneak through the top, and random ways to come off a ladder, random ways to shoot someone, random ways to get everybody bunched up in a corner? I mean, these are theatrical devices of the Grand Guignol that we just can't live without. I mean, we can't live without it. And then it's totally done for peppered entertainment. Back then was looked, as it is today, art on the highest order. And now I admit the special effects gurus like Peter Jackson have gone a tidbit too far, maybe in their early beginnings of having these kind of films that are like the Harmony Korine, only this time they've got like special effects that are in-camera effects, and now it's with that like trauma, gory, no guts, no glory. Like, I don't want to be too rash with the way I say this, but at the end of Dead Alive by Peter Jackson, this guy literally does mow down about 1,000 zombies. It's the most gory scene in human history, and only special effects can be blamed on that. And they were much cheaper special effects than the special effects of Titanic, which will show a boat wrench in half. That's about half this time of the state of California, half the size of California. It wrenches in half, wrenches like this and goes under, and I'm wondering who's got the most twisted disaster movie event, which brings up which you've all been wondering, did D.W. Griffith and the other Americans use special effects? Besides editing, we're not going to get into editing, that's too many can of worms. We'll get into editing later and how those work, the special effects. But I gotta wonder, is Adventures of Dolly really D.W. Griffith's, like, first surviving film? Or no, yeah, I'm getting that from somewhere, but then I would think that the first feature film would be Judith of Bethulia. So now we've got The Spectacle, and The Spectacle does, even Italy levels, require special effects. Like Camarilla has a lot of special effects, and not just camera angles and edit moves, but like whole special effects, like sets built to look like the Moloch pit with their Trompe drawers. And you see in Metropolis, you know, in the German UFA, before the Reich took over the movies, and they're building this whole set to look like people are either working on their machine repeatedly, or they too are taking the long cast tail into the Moloch pit. And all of these things are done in harrowing special effects. That Metropolis has a robot on it that is so much like C-3PO, except the female version. If C-3PO ever met that female version of Metropolis, I mean, that would be the end of all creation. That would be the nightmare that even Satan wouldn't be able to stop, because they would create so many babies that would be able, like, you know, Yoda babies, but they're C-3PO babies. And they'd all be able to translate so many languages that no one would be able to get one over on the kick-ass C-3PO machine to determine what alien voices are. No, we've already had that talk. So anyway, I'm just saying that, like, we don't want some of these robots to meet up, even though, like, Robbie the robot, he got to meet all his scrappers, but C-3PO doesn't need to meet the Metropolis robot. Okay, I thought they were going to do that in episode 7. I thought they would somehow bring up the Metropolis robot, and I was just like, and if the Satan Star's not there, then I just can't go for it as much. I just can't go for it as much. But I had heard Jay Huberman one time as a critic say that all the special effects, all the B-rated things, all the perfect ship to the moon type things were all elaborated upon in Metropolis by Fritz Lang, and that Fritz Lang really took captivation of that film, that he really set up the holy grail of art and all that is artisticness with the sci-fi genre at an H.G. Wells level, which was already proclaiming itself with its other directors. Now, speaking of fantasy film, we come back to D.W. Griffith, and he makes this one. It's really his first, like, 40-minute, like, real feature right before, and it's Enoch Arden, but they release it in 2 reels, and there's still Judith of Bethulia's 50 minutes, other than the 40 minutes, which is Enoch Arden, and Enoch Arden's really the first, so to speak, feature film by America, because 40 minutes is where it originates from. 40 minutes is how long it has to be a feature, at least. And usually movies that are out in theaters don't fall under an hour 30. Usually movies on the internet that I make, we're lucky to be over the hour mark, because we got already scrambled into the next, hey, what you guys watching next, now that the last 30 minutes is here, you know. I mean, we're not quite in that scramble, but we got to stay on top of how many products we put out. And, you know, I could go into special effects forever, but to get back to one module that does work for me is to add them in later, because I can see how even the effects that you're trying to achieve that are literary towards the script are also effects that you're trying to achieve basically how you shoot the camera. And you can actually get that advice from the animation role of rotoscoping, where I could film everything that's on right now and then digitally have it animation over the top. And I actually have the availability to do that. I'm not doing it for this class because it takes an extra segment to hide and then show later, and I'm not a hide and tell kind of guy. But anyways, the last things I'll really get into is that last thing I was talking about, is how special effects can really govern the film once it's made too, so don't really frown on it if the event was already made before your event horizon, because most of the time they discover how to do new things by making it happen for the exact channels that they're working on at the time they're making the film. But when we were working on, say, when I was directing Diary of a Blacksmith for an NYU, and I was turning in a student film for NYU so they could have one of mine for personal use and see what it was like, and I'd gotten a degree from NYU, and I thought, well, now's the perfect time to turn in my student film. And it's a feature film I made with some friends and family, and we all got together and we shot the whole thing. But like, as we shot it, we didn't even really know it was a movie until we got to the edit bay and we assailed all this footage onto an edit bay, and we were going, wow, this is really what a blacksmith does his whole life. I'm glad we didn't use a real actor. I'm glad we didn't use, but these guys are really into the business and do everything else, you know, in the business. I'm just kind of this slacker director. I'm like, hey, I think this is a blacksmith film. And we got all the pieces together, and lo and behold, what really helped me hold it together as an editing piece was that you see those images of Skyrim where you're learning to be a better blacksmith and you're becoming a better blacksmith, and everything's about getting to be the best blacksmith you can possibly be. And that's what this reminds me of. He's like training to be better. That's why it's a diary this way. He's progressing toward the end, and that we mixed all the scenes. But there's a shot I'm going to tell you how to make. If you take the last frame off of every end scene, or time you hit cut or chop it with the axe, or when you stop at a scene, if you take the last 3 seconds off of each scene you stopped, which if there's Diary of a Blacksmith, you don't have a lot of big chunks of film. You only have like 10 or 17 big chunks of film you're hunking off of on that case. And hunking off of is the right term, because the guy in the movie, I mean, he's a hunk, dude. Anyway, but special effects of the filters, the black and white, the slowing down time at certain scenes, the sound scheme, seem as a way a little over much until you get further into the film and hear the Aussie music and hear the 9 Inch Nails, and you're like, well, I didn't know those were in this film. And I'm like, well, I made it to where you have to turn it up really high to hear those, but sometimes that means the blacksmith noise is loud, and that's what I wanted it to be. It was really loud, but you can have it kind of midway down and still hear the Aussie pretty good. And that Ozzy was able to agree to use that soundtrack, and the 9 Inch Nails have always helped us out. We love that. But what we're saying is the way we melded it into this kind of like special effects movie was only because we already knew we had the special effects that would have done that. And those were all out camera effects, and no, we didn't really have to plug in the animating. We did have to render it, you know, you did have to render it, which is where it shoves it into the whole picture. It takes a lot faster on these digital computers. It's almost an instant render. In the old days, it would take like weeks to render these things. You can only imagine that the guys that worked in the old days of technology must be the giants of philosophy, because they would have to wait blocks of time to get barely a little piece mounted, and it would still be a more perfect piece than had ever been seen, even though they didn't have computers, and all they could do was put in these scenes. And you know, it's funny, the whole irony of it becoming commercial, I only say commercial for narrative, is the cartoon where the cigarettes are walking like you know, cigarettes are walking, Lucky Strike, and those are like Oscar Fischinger as a German after World War II doing a commercial for America, or before World War II, even doing a commercial for America to tout his own kind of taste as an experimental animator, which Emil Cole was an experimental animator that invented animation. And we'll discuss more about experimental animation and other types of animation as we go through this class, but a lot of times experimental animation is where they discover that they have the special effect in use. Like Mary Ellen Butte's frequency signifier has been used for even the invention of TV. I mean, so many inventions, and she made it just to be a sound coordinator, that the light would follow the sound. And now you go back to Fischinger, who's doing this dun-dun-dun with the cigarettes, and you're thinking, well, now he's every frame calculating where everything needs to be in terms of where the music is. And don't think these other animators aren't thinking about that, because they're usually thinking about dialogue. Now that it's Toy Story 3D animation, they're thinking about dialogue, soundtrack, background track, which a lot of sound effects, and then the sound effect track, and then a lot of sound effects are stripped through all those. Those are actually come from a general sounding, and everything is more manipulated from the general image. I usually keep it at general. I like the Bazan idea, everything I film is real. It's really happening. I'm really filming this. This is really cool. I know it works, like there's 24 digital frames or so, maybe 29 per second, that are recording me and convincing these people that I'm actually in this room behind me, moving and not sitting on their living room table where, oh, you're going to drop that. Oh, got it. Good. No, you're so not sitting at your living room table, even though I could be in some form of a computer device telling you now things I actually said earlier. And now it all boils down on this is just a real shot. There's no special effects in this. That is true, but that doesn't mean we don't know what they are. And by example, special effects range in such like banality as, say, the flying dog in Strange Brew, which is cool. I'm cool with the lowbrow slapstick comedy, man. And lowbrow slapstick comedy always has the one special effect in it that had to be done in like some way they can't explain it. And, again, we've got to give credit to South Park, too, because of all their motion sensor control, the way they move those objects around, like Lottie Reiniger is for her animation in Adventures of Ahmad, that they're doing kind of the same thing, only it's more difficult because it's moving cutouts. And I think what they do is really hard, and I think they deserve credit just for working hard. Animators, special effect operators, the people that got us into Star Wars and Jaws. And The Exorcist was the first blockbuster, the first movie to make more than $100 million. And it made $300 million, $400 million on its first release. It's now coming to its own franchise in the billion. Movies that are greater than $100 million are just like moving into the franchise area of becoming $1 billion worth. Because the movie's already worth what it's worth that's shot. And that makes special effects movies worth a lot for what's shot, because that's how much they spent on it. And then due to the fractionizing of how they spent on it, due to what it's worth to 1 billion people that get to see it and are pronounced with this idea. And that we're moving with music, talking, images, everything that we have to keep and concentrate where we go. The computer can only analyze where perhaps we'd like to move, but we usually don't use that. We usually use the same thing painters do, instinct to move from one plot to the next. And that painting you'll see is moving. I just plotted this point. I now need to plot this point, and my whole plot's figured out. But plotting one point to the next on special effects has brought us movies like Legend, The Abyss, Titanic. Minority Report's a great movie, but it also shows not only special effects in their abundance and at their best, but Steven Spielberg is proving that he can use special effects better than anyone, is he not? That he can use special effects better than anyone is proven also by Scorsese and Hugo, matching this Méliès thing where Hugo is in this whole world. But I'm going to have to go back to Minority Report because it's a sci-fi movie and it's Steven Spielberg and it moves in such a way that you would freak out if there wasn't a special effect. You would think the whole scene was Emperor Chamberous if there was no special effect in a scene. You would think the scene was trying to trick you if there weren't tons of, like, scaly creatures with worms popping out Naked Lunch style, only in one of the versions that was made. I mean, I'm not telling you to run and see this movie, but if you want to see special effects done to a good length, I mean, you can always have James Cameron do anything, but look at the movies AI and Minority Report. How these are, again, seamlessly convincing us that these robot worlds exist, that these oracle worlds exist, that these future calamities exist. We not only suspend our belief, we not only persist our vision, but we could say, as the first goers to special effects being perfected to the point of AI and Minority Report, we could say from 30 seconds of those films that no other film besides maybe Star Wars and Avatar and Harry Potter, but close, has anything close to the special effects that are wrecking its way through this. Now, I like the way that Abyss uses special effects, too, because in Minority Report, there's kind of the same thing. It's kind of this morph liquid that's coming up. And I know they invented that just for the movie because no other movie had done it first. And they had showed this face come out of the liquid and was talking to people. And it was like, really, I mean, that's all the movie was to show off that. And I was hooked from the start. I thought there is this whole thing about the abyss and being eternal and being existential and falling below the case, but when you look into the abyss and it looks back at you, as something Nietzsche said, and then suddenly the water is looking at you. I've always wanted to know, even before I'd seen that, which I was born seeing that, so I was born seeing that frame now. But I like when they talk to alien water people in these Avatar movies. Is there anything? And I like the special effects and AI when they go through that ramp, or really do in-camera and off-camera special effects. When Steven Spielberg hits us with the robot holocaust, it's so damn hardcore that we think we're going to get robots munched to pieces and grinding gears flying everywhere and explosions. And they're doing this all to the speak of the take. And there wasn't a lot of animation, like cel-drawn, but there was animatronics in that scene, bro. And animatronics ain't a special effect that comes cheaper real easily. So let's just leave it on the fact that some of these movies, even by Peter Jackson, that have some of these bad tastes with these endings that are totally far-fetched. I make you would rather be watching Heavenly Creatures. Fear not. They're only a certain series of movies. They only prove that you can do the blood and guts thing more than trauma and still get away with it. But that they're using animatronics at all in the Peter Jackson film after the misuse. Just kidding, they didn't misuse any animatronics. You can't really misuse an animatronic. We built it not to feel pain. All right, thank you for coming to class. We're going to go ahead and sign off for tonight. I know that was a really throw you in to the fun of it all mix up, but we'll see if we can't keep this going. There's 12 more classes till the end, so, or 11 more classes till the end. And yeah, we're doing 12 classes of this special effects class. I'll see you in a few days. All right, thanks for coming back to Masterclass. All right, we'll talk to you later. Bye.